let's define some terms. The Himalayan Consensus Program, qu'est-ce que c'est que ça?
What is it? Yeah. Well, Himalayan Consensus is a program we've started to develop nearly a decade ago. And it really began in Tibet with the idea of trying to create sustainable heritage tourism that could help the community. I mean, we're not really just creating hotels for our own profit, but actually the hotels themselves mobilize many workers to keep their traditional crafts alive. Some of them are ecotourism lodges that have programs to preserve the environment around. And then all the products, all the crafts, all the items in the hotel are made by disabled. In turn, the hotel business supports medical clinics, even a school. And so we have a concept of a sustainable development, empowering people to protect their own culture, and in turn using business to achieve social programs. We call it Himalayan Consensus. We took the idea from Tibet and we went around South Asia and linked up with people like Mohammed Yunus, who are developing microfinance for the poor, banker for the poor, Nobel laureate, the Prime Minister of Bhutan, who's a great advocate of a concept called gross national happiness. And combining these ideas together, try to create a new economic paradigm. The Himalayan Consensus has 3 principles: protect ethnic diversity and local indigenous identity. Second, through a sustainable business, not through aid, calling for changes in our financial order to be able to get capital to small, medium-sized, even micro businesses. And 3, the principle that business should give back to the community, help develop the community, be a stakeholder in the community, and protect the environment. And that's it in a nutshell.
That's a lot of stuff. Let me ask you some questions that come to mind. You talked about the National Happiness Product. And I recall recently, in fact, this week, we're doing a movie about the Aloha Medical Mission in Nepal in a town called Dankuta.
Right.
And one of the speakers in the movie really touched me. She said that these people, they had nothing, and yet they were always happy. For the most part, they were happy. And you had to reconcile with that. Because if you come back to the U.S., most people have more than they have in Dankuta, but they're not nearly as happy. How does that work?
Well, we have created measurements of success that are material-based. On a national level, it's gross national product. Oh, how much output do we have? On a personal level, we are measuring success by how many cars you have in the garage, what kind of brands you're wearing. These measurements are, in a Himalayan perspective, artificial. I mean, the entire premise behind this is the neoliberal model that greed, Adam Smith's capitalism, greed motivates people. And so all the markets will be imbalanced if we liberalize them and allow greed to take over. But it's really an unfair assumption. People are motivated by more than greed alone. They're motivated by their community, their environment, their family, their culture, their cultural integrity, and spiritual values. And all of these play an important part in the composition of the Himalayan Consensus, including gross national happiness. Because the philosophies of Asia, whether it's Taoism in China, we look at the Himalayas as a border, as a place that brings South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia together, not separating them. And the values of these philosophies, Taoism, Buddhism, Hindu, Islam, Jainism, Sikh, it is really all about the community. It's putting the community first and realizing that without the community, the individual has nothing. And this is a core concept. It's actually about giving as much as taking.
You say that it's not about greed, and yet I think of individuals, not necessarily people I know, but people in the news who seem to be motivated exclusively by greed. So when you say that we're motivated primarily by community, are you talking about everybody or just some people?
It's a value paradigm. We have been pushed by media, by education, by so many of the frameworks that we grow up in this country, in the West, that it's the individual I, not the community, that getting ahead is measured by material measurements, that we forget the other factors in life that are equally as important. And I really think what influenced me in this regard was not necessarily the time I spent working in the Himalayas, But it all began here at University of Hawaii when I was in school here over 25 years ago. And it was a spirit of aloha, the idea of being able to have a greater community sense and the importance of that identity that I think actually influenced me way before I got up to Tibet. And, I think it's very important because here in Honolulu, in Hawaii, we're dealing with multi-ethnic communities. Each community tries to retain and is encouraged to retain their own ethnic identity. But at the same time, you have a convergence of identities of people being from Hawaii or being Kama'aina and feeling a part of a broader family. And I think this is really important because a lot of time people, they're very rich. Look at the stars in Hollywood. They're on drugs. They're messed up. They've got mansions and palaces. But they have really big mental problems. And their money is wasted. And why? Because they don't have an identity. They don't know who they are. They're lost. And I think they're not part of a family. And I think this is very important. And we're not thinking holistically. We need to bring a bigger picture into the equation. People are motivated by greed, but they're not motivated by greed alone. It is one factor in the many factors of human personality and community that has to be considered in deciding economic policy.
Do they always need family? I mean, we were talking earlier about how people came to this country as immigrants, and family was so important to them now. Work ethic was different then. They were motivated in large part, I think, clearly then by family. But we don't have that kind of family now.
They were motivated by community, a sense
by
of community.
community,
We were
yes,
creating
yes.
communities. I think we're going to have to go back to doing that. And that's what the Occupy Wall Street movement's all about. I mean, everything has been in the template of globalization, get multinational corporations to go global, create massive shopping malls without any personality at all, which is really lobotomizing entire communities. And then the community doesn't have an identity. It doesn't have a self. I mean, so you measure who you are, your identity, by how many brands you can buy, how many of these. But if you go anywhere in the world, it's the same. And they say, well, this is globalization. It's good for you. Well, it's good for multinational corporations to scale their marketing. But it's not good for people's personality. It's not good for their mental health. And it's not good for the community. And in turn, we're going to have to see, to revitalize this country, a regeneration of our communities. And that's going to happen with small business, small sustainable business. The first thing that someone says is, oh, you have a little business. Don't you want to scale it? Don't you want to go to the market? Don't you want to list? Well, maybe you don't. Who needs that stress? Maybe you want to just be able to keep that business, know who your customers are, have a sense of community, be a part of that, have your customers stakeholders in what you're doing, and grow that incrementally. There's a lot of happiness in that. Maybe you don't need the stress of sitting in an office tower and looking at the stock price of your business every day.
I just want to reconcile one thing. You're in a really good place for a segue, but you say that the consensus, Himalayan Consensus, involves setting up businesses and craft businesses and so forth, microloan business. Inherent in that is profit.
Yes.
So you're not putting a damper on profit here.
Should be profitable. Businesses should be profitable. Businesses create jobs. Businesses create services. Businesses create identity. They should be profitable, but they'd be profitable in the right way. And we can't necessarily measure a business only by its profit. I remember back in the 1980s, all the analysts measured a business by its P&L, its profit and loss. And then by the 1990s, we had a new term. We called it shareholders' value. And it was the whole globalization concept. That business is going to take the global market. So we measure it by how much money its management can spend to expand the business. Most of the time, they're spending it on their own expense accounts, on taking trips, on staying in expensive hotels and watching lots of porn video, and they're just blowing their shareholders' money. But everybody said it's shareholders' value, it's okay. Well, look what happened in 2008. I think we need to get back to a new concept, stakeholders' value. The consumer should say, what's that business doing for the environment? What kind of business practices do they have? Businesses should be reporting their business practices. Are they taking measures now for mitigation of their greenhouse gas emissions? Are they adopting energy efficiency? Energy efficiency is so cost effective, but are they doing it? Are they investing in their communities? Are they caring for people? And if they're not, don't buy their products. Boycott it. And that's the new concept of stakeholders' value.
Okay, I want to explore that with you, but I also want to go forward from the East-West Center experience, from the UH experience you talked about 25 years ago. So you learned about Aloha, but then you had a lot more learning to do because ultimately you became an investment lawyer, which
No aloha there. That was
well,
cutthroat world.
but somewhere in the process, you learned a lot of things, and then you found that maybe what you had learned needed another spin or something. And I need to know, I want to know exactly what that trip was, what the voyage was.
Confessions of a lawyer. After I left UH Law School, I was in big law firms in Hong Kong, a cutthroat world. I was a hired gun for multinational corporations. I negotiated ExxonMobil's first deal in China, Kodak's first deal. And, I was basically the man with the key. And then after doing that, I started to work I was often consulted by government on financial reform, monetary policy. Asian governments, China, Vietnam, Laos, did a little work in Cambodia, a little bit of work in Mongolia, but the three big ones were China, Vietnam, and Laos. But then in 2002, I woke up one day and I said, wait, I don't want to be doing anything for multinational corporations. I want to look at things from the other side. I also felt in 2002 China's major structural reforms were over with. It had entered WTO, it had been approved to host the Olympics in 2008, and China was on its own track. They didn't need any more advice. So I thought about looking at things from the grassroots, and I always wanted to make films. So I shut my consulting company down, put together a film crew, a bunch of Chinese hippies. We went out to Tibet and we started to make films, and we made a couple of crazy documentaries.
About Tibet.
About Tibet.
This was not popular with the Chinese government.
It was experimental film. It was very experimental, and we did get access to go into areas people have not filmed before, and got some great footage. But what we were exploring were values, and actually learning from the Tibetans, learning from the hill tribes, learning from different ethnic groups all across Western China. And what came up consistently was that ethnic groups, whether they were Tibetan, Mani Masai, Mosu, Nasi, these hill tribes or nomadic groups, many of them had individuals who wanted to protect their culture, but the only way they could do it was find a business model. I'll give you an example. There's a monk, and he wants to preserve the lifestyle of nomads. Now, the official position of Chinese government is nomads should be resettled. They shouldn't be living in tents. They say they don't get health care and education. He goes, wait, we changed the nomadic practices. This is a major impact on the environment because the yak grazing patterns have been taking place from Nepal all the way through Mongolia up to the Bering Straits since the time that the yak crossed the Bering Strait and became bison. And so if you actually disrupt the grazing practices, you have an environmental imbalance in one of the most sensitive biodiversity regions of the world.
Which affects lots of other regions.
It affects a lot of regions. The snow cap there is very precious, and it's the water source for half of humanity. And so he started to develop a program where he would set up a factory to make cheese in the nomadic regions, about 5,000 meters above sea level. That's very high. And he would purchase every day yak milk and then process fantastic Swiss cheese and export it. It's very, high-end exotic yak milk cheese for cocktail parties. And then he'd use the proceeds to invest in schools for nomads at that altitude. And so the nomads continue to live their life. They get income. They start to have education. He's got kids online up there. I mean, it's amazing what he's done. And it is self-sustainable. And it's an example of doing business to protect your culture, in turn to protect the environment.
This is a Tibetan person?
A monk.
A monk.
Monk doing business.
Did you help him?
We filmed him. We gave him a lot of publicity.
You found him in doing those things.
We bought a heck of a lot of cheese. Actually, he provided the cheese for our hotel for a long time in Lhasa. We made great pizza out of it. We had the best. I once said to the Italian ambassador to China that we have the best pizza in the world. We're going to really, we take out Sicily anytime because it uses yak cheese. It's fantastic.
There was a gap in there. So you were at UH Law School, and then you were in China. How did that happen?
I came to UH Law School after having spent time in China studying Chinese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I was very interested because at the time, the only program for Chinese law was here at UH and the East-West Center. And I was a research assistant to Victor Lee, who was then president of the East-West Center. He taught me how to write books. So now the great irony is 25 years later, I'm back at the East-West Center writing a book about all these
Wonderful.
experiences.
That's
so
really,
the cycle goes full circle.
you bet.
Yeah.
So, okay, so, gee, I mean, you must have had a really interesting experience going from the practice of law and doing all those really straight things to documentaries in Tibet. Wow, that must have been exciting. And then what happened after the documentaries in Tibet?
I was so influenced by these individuals. One was the monk, another was an artist who was helping a factory of all disabled Tibetans to make Tibetan crafts. And in turn, the factory was supporting a school of disabled orphans.
Also Tibetan.
Also Tibetan. A ethnic Bai is another tribe, girl who was a choreographer, and she was going into the mountains and bringing tribal kids out and trying to film and record the dances and songs before they're lost, and creating an ongoing performing arts program for them that could be sustainable. And an Indian woman who set up one of the first ecotourism lodges in southwest Yunnan, which is an area where all these different ethnic groups come together. So I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are 4 examples. Let me bring them together and try and create a micro model for development at the grassroots. And that's what brought me to Tibet to set up the Shambhala Sarai group.
Okay. So, somewhere in here you were developing the philosophy, or maybe you had it already. A philosophy.
Aloha, it was there.
Okay. But here we are in Tibet, and we're finding notions of Himalayan consensus, and we're finding rules that would apply anywhere. We're finding a worldview, a new worldview, a different worldview, maybe a worldview without a whole lot of precedent, at least not in those times. How did that happen in you?
Well, began to develop the enterprise. We started by working on old buildings. I always say that architecture, 2 things that are key in preserving a culture. One is architecture and the other is language. And if you lose either or, then you're losing the culture very quickly. Because architecture is every people's dialogue with their environment, and it's the foundation of community, as is language. And so we took over a couple of old buildings and started to restore them. And in the process, Tibetan workers joined us, and their skills were being transferred. You could see skills being transferred from father to son, and the whole apprentice concept. And in turn, we kept about 30 to 50 Tibetans busy for about 5 to 6 years, restoring one building after another, and in turn, turning them into hotels, restaurants, shops, and then giving Tibetans jobs. I mean, a lot of them had no employment before, and almost everyone who worked with us had no higher than a 5th grade education. 90% are women, 50% are disabled. So we started to create disabled workshops. We set up a yoga studio and programs for silent yoga, with deaf people being able to teach yoga, and in turn created a whole model. We then went up to the mountains and did it up at a very high altitude, at 4,200 meters above sea level, on sacred ground where there's these incredible hot springs that are connected to the Naga serpent spirits. And there we preserved this area and did it in conjunction with a village of nomads who were also disabled from contaminated water due to mining. And so they had the hot springs as a kind of government, should we say, compensation for their disability, but they didn't know how to use them in a sustainable way to run a sort of hot spring lodge. So we took it over for them. And to build a lodge, we found a building that was being torn down by developers in Lhasa. So we moved the old building stone by stone and built it into the sides of the canyon. That's the hotel. And in turn, put a medical clinic in, microfinance center for nomad arts and crafts, and support the village.
Let me take a quick break. I think Malcolm is outside. He was knocking on the door. It's okay. You can open it. Malcolm? Malcolm, are you there? Oh, okay. No matter. Let's make a splice. Well, what strikes me, Laurence, is you're out there and you're reorganizing this whole community or groups of communities changing their lives, changing the way they operate, uplifting them in so many ways. First of all, I would imagine, just as the Aloha Medical Mission had enormous personal gratification, you were also having enormous personal gratification helping people like that.
I gave up a law career. I turned away income, and I was much happier waking up every morning, looking out over the mountains, and realizing that everything we did every day impacted people. It was changing their lives. I'd have my office we have a building, and the first floor are the workshops with the disabled working there. The second floor is a yoga studio. The third floor was my apartment. The fourth floor was my office. And then I would go down to the shops and work with them on designs, and then I even taught yoga. And every day I saw people's lives changing. I saw the impact. And then we started to support eye operations. We started by supporting, we'd do fundraisers. On the back of our business, we have also a historical restaurant in Beijing, and we would, entertain guests and ask them to come and make donations. And with one night, we were doing 300 eye operations, taking blind people and being able to do cataract surgery.
Now that's gratification.
And then you go into nomadic regions and see people who are blind. In the nomadic regions, if they're blind, they don't have a life. And they're, for the family, it's a tremendous burden. And suddenly the whole family is gratification, somebody instantly being able to see. And we began to get up to about 1,000 operations a year. And so you see immediate impact changing people's lives, and that is a lot more gratifying to me than having a brand watch or driving a fancy car or, building up more billable hours in a law firm. I mean, who needs that? I'm much more happier to see people's lives changing positively and being part of that than to be in that other world.
So are you supporting yourself through those activities or through savings from, your earlier life in the law?
Live a simpler life, that's all.
It's a simpler life.
You live a simpler life, sure.
So does this drive you now? This is it for you? I mean, in terms of the Himalayan Consensus and finding a new model for these people?
It goes beyond Tibet. It goes beyond South Asia. We have to take this approach global. We have to start to change global values because we are living in a planet of diminishing resources. And the idea of a lot of these economists and people at the Fed about having stimulus packages to stimulate consumption, to have a better economy, are not working. The problem with our economy is not stimulating consumption. The problem with our economy is too much consumption. We have to change the underlying assumptions of the way our economic system works and then change that system, because if we don't, we won't have a planet to live on.
How do you feel about technology? Would you take my computer? Would you take my camera?
Technology is essential if we use it in the correct way. The problem is for many people, if technology is controlling them, they're not controlling the technology. I watch too many people playing games on their iPhones and not using it in a constructive manner. Of course, technology can be very important in linking up NGOs and exchanging information. I use mobile phones. I can be in the middle of the Sahara where I'm now doing work in Africa and be getting text messages and communicating with people in Nepal. But you have to be able to use it. The technology is only as smart as the person who's using it. And the way corporations are promoting it and the way education is promoting it is the technology is now using people. It's using our young people.
The machine is commanding us.
We are not machines. We are people. There's nothing I hate worse than going to an airport in the United States and having to confront a machine. Having to put in every airport in every country in the world. If you think about Dubai, Beijing, these are the most sophisticated, most advanced airports on the planet, but they have all people working in them. Everywhere there's people. And I want to give people jobs. I don't want to give machines jobs. There's nothing that makes me more furious than going into an airport or making a phone call and talking to a machine. We need to give people jobs and respect people, not get so egotistical about our technology. We're not saving money. We're actually creating more costs.
Is it so? You want to give people jobs because that means jobs, or do you want to give people jobs because that improves the quality of our lives in dealing with the processes around us?
Because people are people. That's why they should have jobs. Because people, first of all, it's more efficient to work with people. Second, give them income. Third, identity is very important. Your workplace is as important as your home in many respects. It is an identity factor. You have a place to go, you have a community to work with. And what we're doing is with our globalization ideas, which are all driven by capital market. It's all driven by taking the stuff and listing it and making more money and leveraging it and making a derivative out of it and trading it. It's not based on the real productivity of people and respect for people. And that's what we have to get back to.
So I get the feeling that your base of operations, although you're going global, your base of operations is in Tibet.
No, I'm a nomad. I have an operation in Tibet. I have an operation in Beijing. I'm here at the East-West Center. I'm doing work in Africa, and I have an operation in Senegal. I'm a nomad. I'm a global nomad. And, that is fine because, we're part of a planet, and we have to be able to, the more you travel, the more places you are, the more you realize the problems are the same. People are similar. They face the same challenges, and the solutions may be different, but a lot of the principles can be worked from one realm to another.
So tell me about the comparison or the similarity with the Occupy Wall Street movement, such as it is.
Occupy Wall Street's talking about the same thing. They're talking about, media focuses on one word, greed. But everybody in the street knows that there's something wrong with our system. And one aspect is jobs. One aspect is students that will spend their life in debt to repay loans. One aspect is homeless. I mean, in Occupy, they're giving homeless food. They're giving them shelter. They're giving them free medical care down in Zuccotti Park. That's what they were doing. Bloomberg should have done that a long time ago. He was out of it. It is about compassionate capitalism. No one in Occupy is calling for a revolution of our system. They're calling for a rethink of our system. But that means a revolution in values. It means a full circle. It means rethinking people's place, respecting people, respecting the environment, and making our planet and our country sustainable, which is not. It's crashing.
Well, one of the indications I suppose you would find of crashing is the homeless problem. And so far, it's at least in Hawaii, and I guess other places too, it's been essentially insoluble. I mean, nobody has made a real dent in it, and every time you look, there's more people and more disaffection. How would you deal with that?
There is no reason for our country to be in the mess it is in. It is just bad management. The homeless can have homes. There needs to be funding to create jobs for them, to create areas. Let them build their homes. Let them participate in the creation of their homes. Let's start communities for them. Let's empower them with jobs. Let's give them finance. Let's give them venture capital. Let's create small business units. Go down and organize them. Bring them together. And they don't want to be homeless. Nobody wants to be in this position. They have been forced out because of a system that has become dysfunctional. A system that has relied on extreme leveraging of capital instruments and created, of course, a real estate bubble, all being leveraged, all on debt. And at the end of the day, these people get kicked out. They become dispossessed. What are we doing? It's not a question of socialism or capitalism. It's just a question of good management. Our politicians are at fault because they are listening to the corporations, and the corporations don't care about people. So we have to change the values. We have to change what's going on. Otherwise, people should take to the street. I support Occupy for doing what they've done. The purpose of Occupy is to occupy the media and keep these issues in people's face until people say we have to do something about it and start to change the system, start to change the value system.
So if I'm somebody who either is occupying or sympathetic with the occupiers, what would you tell me to do? If I agree, what would you tell me to do to implement this?
Occupy is one step. But the other step is creating the foundations for a new model. And that's going to require new policies. We have to have rational policies. We have to bring these policies to the politicians. We have to bring them to the financial system. We have to demand this. It can be demanded through protests, but it also must be demanded through rationally written policy papers discussed with the media. In the case of the homeless, yes, we should be creating microfinance. Where's that going to come from? Is it going to come from the government? Is it going to come from the financial sector? Well, the first thing the government should be doing is creating a center to sit down, or a committee to sit down with leaders in the financial sector and say, look, Government will put in 1/3. We want you guys to put in 1/3. City's going to put in 1/3. Come up with a special fund. Get experienced people from an NGO background to run that, to come in and to actually be able to say to the homeless, okay, fine, what do we want to do here? How many homes do we need built? We need to be able to take the land to acquire that. What would you like to do? Would you like to set up your own business? Would you like to set up your own farm? Would you like to set, what can we do to empower you? We want you to have respect. We want you to respect yourself. We want you to build your own future. What can we do with you? We have a lot of people who have counseling ability. Wow, we have so many of them. I know they charge a lot of money per hour. Can they volunteer a little bit of time to join a group like that, go down and work with these people, help them come out of their own problem, their own challenge, because they've been dispossessed. They've been marginalized. You know, I survived the bomb explosion in Pakistan.
What, a terrorist bomb?
A terrorist bomb in Islamabad. And I walked out of that alive, and the place was swarming with troops and police, and it was a suicide bomber. And I said, why did that suicide bomber kill himself? Why would 18, 20-year-old kids blow themselves up? There's one reason: they don't have a future. They're willing to do it because they don't see a future in their lives. And a lot of the kids that come from madrasas are very, very poor. Their families are broken, or they have social problems. They're sent to the madras. Madras doesn't have any funding, so it only teaches them one thing, which is religious education. They come out, either they work for a madras or they join a religious organization. They're angry, they feel dispossessed, they feel marginalized, the media makes fun of them, so they go on the warpath. This is the problem. We have to empower people, fund the madrasas, create vocational programs, give people the means to be able to go out. Everybody working for me in Himalayan Plateau does not have higher than a 5th grade education. But you give them respect and you give them the opportunity. Man, they take that opportunity. The best people I have working for me don't have education.
But that's primarily you. How do you make this viral?
Viral. Start to get the message out and start to get people to start to think out of the box. That's the problem.
But you need more Laurence Brahms.
We're going to create more Laurence Brahms. We have to go out there and get more people on board, because this is actually, it's not about Laurence Brahm. It's happening all over. I mean, even with the Occupy movement, this is about values. The old values that have allowed our system to crash are now being questioned. They're now being challenged. Actually, we need to also change our political system.
Well,
we need more political parties out there. We have to get away from this kind of 2 parties and it's a game, and then, you know, everybody says, well, you're capitalist, you're socialist. We got to stop thinking this way. We got to think pragmatically. We have to be able to think about what are the tools that are going to reinvigorate our economy, and what are the tools that are going to reinvigorate a political process. Let's give people who don't have a voice a voice. That's the problem. They're not represented.
There's a certain amount of risk in all of that, though, if you're going to start changing basic structures in the law and in government, you know. You run the risk of, chaos, don't you?
All congressmen should give a certain amount of their vacation time to working with homeless people.
I agree.
That's a start.
agree.
We should start right here in Hawaii.
Right.
Local Congress, everybody should give a certain amount of their time. It should be mandatory, voluntary, go out and work with the homeless. The homeless problem will be solved in 1 month.
I agree, but how do you get there? In other words, if everyone in the community agrees with this discussion, what do they do?
Community has to get together, network. That's what Occupy did. Occupy Honolulu, you got a few tents down there. That's not achieving anything. Occupy Wall Street was a statement, because Wall Street is the center of global capital, and it's the center of American capital. And the abuses that led to the subprime and to the 2008 financial crash took place right there at that location. It is a symbol. It is like standing in the square in Washington. It is a symbol. Occupy Honolulu is not a symbol. It's dispersing the momentum. What we need to be doing is getting people together in the community who are thoughtful, activists, together with business people. They should not be in conflict. They should be working together to solve problems. I bet for the financial sector, and I bet for other sectors, there's an opportunity in creating homes for the homeless. There's an opportunity in giving the homeless employment. There's an opportunity in empowering them to seek their own employment. There's a business opportunity there. And it can be to everybody's advantage. We need to bring people together in networks, whether it is online or whether it's with actual community people face to face, and that's how it has to begin. It is driven by people. Solutions are by people. If we want to solve them, we can do it.
Let's take me, okay? With whatever I have, I might do something here. I might do something, say, for the homeless question. I would like to do something.
Let's do it on your program. Start to use it as a
Well,
forum.
you're here, and there'll be others. I'm doing another program in the next few weeks with somebody who has a lot of influence in the homeless issue. But what specifically am I going to ask those people to do? I mean, who drafts the legislation? Who writes it down? Who changes the system so that it works better?
What we should be doing is getting a few lawyers on the program,
I
because
agree.
they're the ones who know how to influence the politicians and redraft the legislation, come up with a proposal, find out what legislation needs to be changed and where we need to get funding, and that funding should come partly from the government. But then there should be a call to the community, get the financial community to support, because this problem is a problem for everybody. It impacts people on a daily basis. It's a loss of face in Asian terms for America or for Hawaii to have homeless. Well, let's solve it. And then bring in civil society people who know how to deal with it. Have a call out there for, we need people who can do counseling, because of course these people have been disempowered. We need to re-empower them. That's psychological, support as well as monetary support have to go together.
So take me down. I've heard, for example, senior bank officers of the banks in this community, which are successful banks, say that they recognize the huge cost of homelessness on the community, and worse, the cost it will take to repatriate those homeless. They understand that. It's in the billions, no question about it, and we'll have to pay it. But they don't actually take affirmative action. So let's assume that here I am. I agree with you. I want to change that part of the paradigm. I want those guys to invest their money where their mouth is. What do I do?
First, you go to the banks with the lawyers, try and have an organization that meets with them. If they don't meet them, then you start to put social pressure on the way of protesters. That you start to let them be aware that you have people outside their place of business every day. We need your assistance. We need
Signs.
your support. We need you to come on board. I mean, work with us. If you don't work,
Pickets.
bring the homeless down there. Let them take action. On another level, take action in small steps. You can't eat a bowl of rice in one go. You've got to take it in steps. So then what you do is you say, well, let's not try and solve all the homeless at once. Let's do an experiment. Let's go to one group. Let's try and solve a problem for 10 people. Let's be realistic and see if that model works. It may not work. There may be adjustments we have to take. We may need to rethink it. But start from the ground up, because part of the problem with all of these things is people are working at a theoretical level. Debate is taking place in the air. And what has happened, what our experience is, and the experience of so many NGOs working across the Himalayan region and in Africa, is that they're working on the ground up. They're working with very small numbers. They try something. A lot of the times the solutions are driven by the circumstances right there. It's not a theory. It's not coming from an MBA. It's not coming from some economist who's written a wonderful theory to win an award, who's never been outside the university. It's actually being done by people right in the street who are facing the daily problems and solving them. And what happens is the whole point of what Himalayan Consensus is, let's look at the actual solutions that have worked, draw from them, and then start to build your models. And I bet in the Pacific region, solving problems for homeless somewhere out there, there are NGOs who've done this and who have maybe a very small example, but it's worked. And if it works, do it.
Let's say I totally agree with you. And I would like to get behind you on this. I would like to see you succeed wherever you, in your nomadic travels. I'd like to see it all work. What do I do to help you?
Putting me on your show helps, because we can get a voice out there. The fact that we can have this discussion, get people to think about it, get people to think in a rational sense, is a very big step forward. We need people to be able to think out of the box and be able to have dialogue about it. Part of the problem is so much of our media doesn't want to have this dialogue.
Why not?
I think because media is probably driven by corporate interests, probably driven by the very interests that don't want to be challenged by this. I think this is the mainstream media problem. That's why so many people are turning to internet and to social media. It's an alternative. But we need to also be in mainstream media. We need to be able to talk about this on television. When I was in Occupy Wall Street, I was really fed up with the media. A lot of people came to interview me, but it was always trying to depict what was going on down there as fringe, as hippie, as, it was not. You had a cross-section, a microcosm of all of America out there. And for someone who spent most of his life in Asia, I felt really American to be down at Occupy Wall Street because I was feeling the pain and problems of people from all sectors across the country. There were intellectuals, there were people who were from, the street, everybody was there. And they all are facing the same problems because they know something's wrong and it needs to be changed. And the media didn't want to talk about that.
Well, the media, as you say, the media is the corporate world, and the government is the corporate world. And the whole thing goes back to Charles Ferguson's movie, Inside Job, which is a very powerful movie,
Right.
I'm sure. And it depicts a situation that has not been corrected, even till now, in any way. So how do you actually, I think if we could correct that, we could go a long way to satisfying your concerns.
It starts with the changing assumptions. And what I see happening is I see something's already in motion. It's already a shift in the tectonic plates. You have NGOs, you have social activists doing business to be able to support their social programs because aid is dysfunctional or there's so much gobbledygook bureaucracy in getting aid, it's easier to go out and make the money. And they're actually doing this, doing it across the world. At the same time, you have multinational corporations that are sitting there and thinking, the boardrooms are saying, what do we have to do for social responsibility? People are going to protest. People are not going to buy our products. We're not going to be liked. The model we used before is not sustainable. It's not going to work for us. And so they're thinking differently. And in between, you have a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, a whole spectrum. You have now energy companies. You have a whole industry developing on green energy. I believe we could probably re-employ 30 million Americans on green energy alone, on the conversion of our infrastructure and our grid system from fossil-based fuels over to energy efficiency and renewable energy.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I care a lot about that. So where would the jobs be?
First of all, the jobs would be in infrastructure. We need
Rebuilding infrastructure.
You need to rebuild our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is totally outdated in our country.
Not only energy, everything.
Everything's outdated. We talk about airports. I think of modern airports. I don't think of America. The airports are, aside from the fact that you have to use talk to a stupid computer to get your boarding pass, and you still have to find somebody who'll help you get your luggage on the conveyor belt. This is infatuation with technology that's not working, and our airports are antiquated. Our subway systems are antiquated. If you think about them, China has the most modern airport in the world, Dubai, Doha. Places that we used to think about as third world are first world now.
And we're second world.
We're second world. I was riding the subway, a lot in New York when I went down to Wall Street, and I was saying to myself, gee, this is really antiquated subway. When you think about the subway systems across Asia, wow. I said, this is really primitive, and I could only think maybe the reason why they're keeping it this way is when Chinese tourists come here, it's good for tourism.
They like to see the second world.
Maybe this is the gimmick. Maybe that's why Bloomberg keeps the system. We're not investing in our infrastructure, but all the infrastructure, the major problem with CO2 emissions is not driving a car, it's not flying a plane, it's turning on a light. Because our grid systems are all coming from fossil fuels. And that grid system is what has to convert over. And that's where our stimulus package money should be. It should be in that creating jobs. And I believe if we managed our funds correctly, we could have 30 million jobs on climate change, converting that infrastructure over. We've got the technology to do it. We've got the know-how to do it, but we're not putting the money in the right place.
For how long, though? Maybe it doesn't matter how long, but I say if you want to convert the infrastructure, renew the infrastructure, it's not a permanent job.
But you're going to be creating new jobs because you're going to be creating new opportunities, and you'll be making America competitive again. We are not competitive. Our infrastructure is outdated.
Where do we get the money to hire all these people?
We're-
After all, we're having fiscal problems.
We're using QE package. We're basically restructuring our debt all the time. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we're taking the money and where are we putting it? In the banks. We're putting it back in the financial system. So the banks can then the investment banks can then give bigger bonuses to their CEOs and their management. And then what do they do with the money? Well, they put it in the highest growth markets. They put it in Asia. So we're funding Asia's growth. We're creating inflation.
True.
We're creating Bernanke's creating inflation in China. Really, that's effectively what's happening.
I think I agree with you in the sense we have to have people focus on infrastructure as a full-time job, always. I remember when the first great blackout was in the Northeast, and Spencer Abram was the Department of Energy, and somebody asked him, he says, "What happened here?" And he says, "What do you mean? We built this infrastructure. We built this grid, 30 years ago. We haven't put any money into it ever since. What do you think is going to happen? It's obsolete. It's going to fail." And over. He was right, of course. And that's what's happening from that point forward.
What we need in this country, coming back from Asia, yes, we have Himalayan Consensus. I remember one of my professors from undergraduate at Duke University, he was Korean. He came to Tibet and he saw our projects and he goes, Himalayan Consensus is very impressive, but not relevant for developed industrialized countries like Japan and Korea. I said, no, but very relevant for industrialized developed countries like the United States, England, and France. Because we have multi-ethnic societies and we now have increasing pockets of cyclical poverty. And that's where these solutions can be applied. So we need here a new American consensus. That's what we need.
It's a tall order, but let's talk about what you're doing and how it gets to where you want to go. So right now you're lecturing at East West Center. Are you here visiting? Are you in residence? What's the deal?
I'm in residence. I'm a scholar in what they call, I guess, a visiting scholar at the East West Center.
That's great. Good for us to have you.
I'm a resource, being invited to do a lot of talks and interact with people and also in the community. Moreover, I'm trying to bring the Himalayan Consensus program into the East-West Center. I would like to see it become a center for not just, the traditional role of the East-West Center was Asians came there to learn about the West and how things are done in the West and bring it back. I think it should be now a center for the West to learn about the East and start to bring these ideas, the holistic approach to economics, finance, and actually as a way of bringing together civil society, business, and government. Because we are, we operate with these all exclusive from each other, and it's a big mistake. We need to actually, they're all stakeholders, they need to be working together. And I could see the East-West Center and the University of Hawaii playing that role, the business school there playing that role. And I had this hope and vision. I'm also working on a book, and I'm working on a book called The Peaceful Revolution for a New Global Consensus. And I believe it's time we change the old model, the old way of thinking, the North Atlantic view. Adam Smith said that greed is good because the invisible hand will always make markets reach equilibrium, so we should, promote greed. This has got to change. And actually, the truth is, all these hotshot economists and all these East Coast think tanks and universities never did their research properly. Adam Smith never said that. Adam Smith was talking about fair trade. He was talking about artisans and farmers getting their fair payment for their labor and their hard work. That's called fair trade. That's not called free trade. So if Adam Smith was alive today, there's one thing I'm certain he'd be doing: occupying Wall Street.
He'd be in the consensus, eh? So how long have you been here, and how long will you be here? Because we'd want to have this conversation again and follow you.
Okay, I've been here a month, and we'll see where the wind blows. That's where you have to be as a nomad, see what takes you next. But my plans are to try and set this up here at the East-West Center if I can, and then go on to back to the mainland. I'd like to look at what social entrepreneurs are doing across America. There's a new alternative economics movement. There's an entire transformation taking place of communities trying to regenerate themselves. They're finding ways to be sustainable again.
We do need that.
And it's already happening. And It's a question of being able to take these events, connect the dots, and draw some experiences from it, and turn that into meaningful policy. And I think that's the way it's going to. That's the journey, and I'm on my way. I guess it will bring me to New York and Washington. We'll see if we can where we can take these ideas.
Stir up some trouble there, yeah.
Get media to start to talk about it. Have fair debate and fair discussion that's actually going to be able to make some of our policymakers think out of the box.
Are you working alone, or you have an organization that helps you?
I have my own organization, Himalayan Consensus Institute. We're looking to establish a new American consensus group.
Are you looking for thinkers to join you?
We want thinkers to join us. We want people who can be movers and shakers to come together, because it's time we change all of this. If we don't, we're running out of time. Our planet is, the resources are limited, and those are vanishing. And there's simply no reason for America not to be leading on climate change, not to be leading on social entrepreneurship, and to be, sitting here watching the rest of the world take off and get ahead. There's no reason for it.
Yeah,
we shouldn't have homeless everywhere. This is just unnecessary.
What about the notion of maybe that's too strong. You name it any way you want. Anti-globalization. I mean, we've had in the past. It's sort of like one of those shibboleth words, like the word of collaboration, and there's a bunch of words like that. And globalization has been a very positive word. So, is it positive for you?
I think it's not positive or negative. I think globalization began probably with Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan. I mean, there's nothing new about globalization. The transfer of ideas, experiences, skill sets has been going on since man existed. What happened was, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, the neoliberal model, shock therapy, we were going outside. We were saying, multinational corporations have to be everywhere. And we need to have standardization of brands everywhere. And everything is going to be, Starbucks, and everything is going to be McDonald's, and everything is going to be... And this was the thinking behind it that got this in motion. Actually, corporations were seeking to increase their share price on the concept that they were taking the global market. And so this was the notion behind it. It had nothing to do with technology. It had nothing to do with brilliant people in California doing internet. But it became the way the financial system worked. And you had the anti-globalization movement, which was really a community movement. It was people saying, wait, it's not about free trade, it's about fair trade. It's about our community. It's about other things that are happening. We don't want our community to disappear and be replaced by a shopping mall. We want to have a sense of community. We want to be able to have our culture. We want to have our identity. And so you had the emergence of what was called the anti-globalization movement. They themselves called themselves the social justice movement. And that movement has evolved also with an environmental movement. It has reinvented itself in the form of Occupy Everywhere. It's really a continuity of the same thing. And let's put it in a perspective. If you say, those guys are anti-globalization, how do they organize? They organize by internet. They organize by cell phones. They're using the very tools that we associate with globalization to organize. So it's not about globalization or anti-globalization. It's about how we manage our planet. It's about values. It's about integrity of communities.
Tell me how this extends to agriculture, which is important in Hawaii, of course.
Agriculture is essential. One of the things that struck me on a very micro story, I lived in Puck's Alley, down on King Street University.
Back when?
Back when I was a student. And I remember very clearly at that time there were a lot of lei shops. We talk about agricultural flowers. Everywhere there were lei shops. In the morning, a lot of people making leis, and it was really part of the culture. And then there were these wonderful little Japanese shops, and they'd sell mochi, rice, and people after school would go there and have snacks. And there was mom and pop running it. There was a sense of community. There were a lot of these. And Safeway, was it Safeway or Star Market came in?
Star Market.
Star Market came in. And then suddenly, boom, everything's cheaper at Star Market. And all these little places began to vanish. I mean, you can even buy leis there, you can buy, plastic ones at least made in China. And so, all these little community, enterprises began to vanish. And then we had, 7-Eleven pop up, and, everything's being displaced. I'm very happy coming back, a full cycle, quarter of a century, coming back and suddenly finding where that little Japanese shop, mom and pop shop was. It disappeared. It's now a food co-op. They're growing food locally. They're not importing it. And why is Hawaii importing pineapples from Philippines? Why is Hawaii importing mangoes from Brazil? When we have homeless, when we have lots of land, what's going on? This is just bad management. But to see a group of young people creating a food co-op, and I've counted there's at least 4 or 5 food co-op or local type agriculture-based cooperatives running businesses in this little neighborhood, revitalizing that neighborhood. And guess what? Star Market's gone. Power to the people.
This relationship between agriculture and community.
It's integral. And it's going to be happening because people have got to get back to their communities. And that's what built our country. And that is going to be what's going to revitalize our country, not taking money and giving it to Goldman Sachs.
Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful. We
Pleasure.
have more time. We will have more time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Aloha.
All right.
All right. Okay.
Go on for a while, right?
Good. That's cool.
Well, we try to keep it to 56 minutes. That was
that's
about
great.
56 minutes.
All right.
I joked
Very
the other
nice.
day at our firm when I asked Lawrence to come in, I said, Lawrence, this is the most, that commercial, that beer commercial, the world's most interesting man. I said, "No, Lawrence, the most interesting guy from my class, that's for sure."